had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the sunrise.
Something sponsor us.
I like just
We'll cut all this out, by the way. So.
we don't remember what the last episode was about. Yeah,
Yep.
we'll call this out. And
So, I guess-
we there's been a few recent episodes where one of us and me a couple times just came in hot. Like, I
Yeah.
got this thing. We're talking
fired
about
up
this.
about something. Yeah.
And today we're like, we know we want to talk about something super
Well,
specific, but
maybe to like,
needed to try to
let's
figure
preface, like this is the longest gap we've gone in
yeah,
recording. It's been what, a month probably?
it out. Yeah,
about a
I
month?
think it's been a month.
And just external circumstances
Right.
out of our control. But yeah, this has been the longest we've gone without sitting down to record.
And I'm going to be honest with you, it's kind of been tough.
Yeah.
It was.
Well, I think like the thing is too, like we've been in pretty constant communication.
Yeah.
Like we usually talk once or twice a week. Like
Right.
we've seen a couple of movies together.
We have to coordinate things with
We're
releasing clips,
releasing
and just stuff
cli-
with
yeah,
this-
yeah,
and
and-
then obviously on the personal side,
But we haven't like sat down and
right?
I'm interested to see if we're a little off cadence.
Yep.
If the ums and the
Yeah.
we'll see. But it has been the longest since we started the podcast, which I guess is coming on 5 months now.
Yeah, I feel like that's all a blur to me. Like,
Yeah.
like I know it was warm out, I think, when we started.
Yeah.
And I just feel like if you told me, like, when did we do the first episode?
I have no
or
idea.
maybe not that pilot episode, but like the first real episode where we started getting consistent with.
I think being on
I
the
have no
consistent
clue.
2-week schedule is one thing that it's made me realize is how you can get lost and time can feel like it moves really quickly.
Yep.
But at the same time, it makes you realize how the influx and outflux of thoughts and ideas and concepts and ruminations that you have,
Yep.
how much comes and goes.
Yes.
Because like you said, we'll listen to episodes that we recorded probably 10 weeks ago
Yeah.
at the most. And we're like, oh yeah, we did talk about that.
Right.
Oh, wow, that's a great idea. Like we're almost viewing these concepts as if they're new things that we have no prior understanding. We're learning from ourselves almost. And I think that's an interesting phenomenon to experience over time.
Well, in this time that we've had off, I really, I've been consuming a lot, right? You recommended a documentary that was really great, a 4-part documentary called The Century of the Self. I'll put it in the show notes. I'm not going to go down
Adam
the rabbit
Curtis.
hole right now. Yeah. And, I've been going to just kind of been going down the rabbit hole of photography books and watching this Louisiana channel about these different artists, like really getting into this stuff. Not that it's a central hub of the artistic world, but there's a lot of good articles about things going on in the art world in the New Yorker. I've been reading that on the weekend. And so I've been noticing a lot of ideas about what we could talk about bubbling up as it pertains to my work, both as on the YouTube side, but then photography, and even in the past with screenwriting and the artistic pursuits or creative pursuits I've had in my whole life. And so I've been using the Milanote to jot down ideas, and I'll often allow the Milanote to be a place where I can, I don't have to necessarily vet an idea. It can be a little bit of a dumping ground, and then we can vet it together. Because I'm not sure, like, is this a thing? Is this something we need to talk about?
Are we going to dive into this?
Is this worth it? Is this going to be a good topic for the audience to get value from, et cetera? And I, was just fascinated about, well, you consume something, you watch something, you read something, and it gives you an idea. What for me makes me like, oh, I got to write this down.
Yeah.
Even if I'm not judging it too much.
Well, boy, do we have the podcast episode for you.
Way to set
Do
that
you feel
one
the
up,
same
buddy.
way?
What is your approach to ideas? When do you decide to write
I
them down?
love this topic because, like you said, the last couple of episodes we've come in, either side fired up about something, and we'll distill that into something that's relatively out of time, and then try to discuss it. But I think this is something that, especially with having a consistent schedule, it's something you kind of have to figure out. Right. Where do ideas come from? I used to have this conception of ideas that there's a finite amount of ideas out there.
Run out of them.
Yeah, you can if you get a good one,
Yep.
I think that's looking back, obviously that's a pretty naive way to look at things, but
pretty stupid. Actually.
I'm
so dumb
clown. I think if you're open to it, ideas are just everywhere. Honestly, I have too many ideas. They're all great. They're all good ideas. I've never had a bad one.
Big winners.
Huge winners.
It's just how do you pick what's like the absolute best one, right?
Yeah,
they're just all winners.
They're just all so good. So I just don't do any of them because I don't want to make the other ones feel bad.
That's right.
No,
So
I think
sit neutral.
I think this is a good topic though, and you we're getting into it there. Idea capture. Then once you have the idea, how do you distill what's good and what's not? How do you expand on an idea? Because sometimes maybe in the idea. Ideas are such a weird. Maybe we should just come up with a working definition.
Yeah,
that'll inform the rest of this, because when you talk about ideas, it's not always necessarily the same thing. But I definitely think we talk about idea capture, how you distill ideas, how you figure which ones are worth pursuing, and then how I think maybe it's also important that we talk about, and maybe we start here, is what is an idea? We tend to rank ideas on this is a good one, this is a great one. I kind of over the last several years, and especially like as I've started to work within more creative collaborations and things like that, I've started to come to the idea or the
settle down.
Whoa!
Don't use the topic in the
roaring.
explanation.
I've started to come to an understanding that ideas kind of just are, and they can come from everywhere, and they can come from any person. There's no prerequisite of experience to come up with a great idea. Sometimes having experience helps, and sometimes it's hard to come in and come up with a novel idea and something if you don't understand the context or the history. But good ideas can come from anything, and the secret, in my opinion, the way to get to the best ideas is to kind of abandon this mindset that I'm going to have the best idea, or there is a best idea. It's just, you keep refining until it is right. And what did they say? Like, it's like porn, right? You know it when you see it.
You know it when you see it.
You know the idea is right when you see it. And, keep going until you find it.
I'm going to have to search for the reference for the show notes. Like, what exactly are we referring to here?
Don't click that link, boys and
girls.
girls.
Like a Larry Flint thing.
We're kind of goofy today.
A little loopy. I was a little wild in my live stream, not to bring up that, but it was there was some energy there. So I feel like I'm bringing it right now.
Yeah. This is interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe
we're just so happy that we're recording a podcast.
I think
again.
we're just pumped to. But I think that's the thing about ideas is you hear this whenever you listen to interviews with, I guess, our field, great photographers, great directors, great writers. They're almost agnostic. They're just observing ideas as they come and go.
Yeah.
And this was a big part of the Rick Rubin book that both you and I have read in the past year. And just you always be open, observe them as they come and go, and then listen, because anything could be an idea.
And it's not listen to people speaking. It is like listen to the source, listen to the universe, have that openness,
that intuition
listening.
that you have. If something is just, even if it's just a mild little, that's kind of interesting. That's I'm excited. That's exciting.
Yeah.
That's I want to look into that more.
Right.
It's worth doing. There might be something there. You might hit a dead end. Who cares? You're right back where you started.
Yeah.
But you're more experienced.
That's right.
I think, we have it right here. Expectations. You can't have expectation when you're dealing in ideas. When ideas are the currency, you can't have an expectation that you're going to be the best. And if you're directing a team of people, or if you're working with a team of people, it shouldn't be you.
Right. It has to come from you.
It has to come from just.
And that to me is about surrender.
Yeah.
Surrendering to, especially if you're in a collaborative state.
Yeah.
And I think even if you're curating individually, like street photography, let's say on your own, surrendering to all of the ingredients,
Yeah.
bringing that best idea.
Drop the ego.
Exactly.
Drop the ego.
And that's been a common refrain. We've obviously had a common refrain in our conversations about ego, about surrender, about openness and listening. And I think as this podcast progresses and, you sort of see the spine through a lot of these episodes, our journey has been, to try to arrive at that. And I think with ideas too, there's an element of surrendering. And for me, in my experience, openness and listening, ideas bubbling up, coming from sometimes a pain point or a point of friction or a problem that you're experiencing, or coming from just something interesting that you observed. A lot of my YouTube content comes up from a problem, like somebody's having a hard time with this mechanical thing in Final Cut Pro. I can help with that. And then on the photography side, like these 4th of July fireworks tents are fascinating to me. I have an idea now of maybe doing a series on it or a project on it, and then where do I go from there? So so if we look at the conversation around this sort of first phase of an idea is like maybe where it comes from, or
it's
what
that
you do
maybe
with it when
maybe
it
we're
surfaces.
defining it as like that. It's that particle. It's that particle of thought, or a particle of what like the cliche metaphor, the spark,
right.
the spark,
the light bulb.
Yeah, and I think the spark, it is the most cliche metaphor, but the spark that starts the roaring fire, or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you think about it in terms of a visual metaphor for an abstract concept, it's not a bad one.
Yeah,
because it starts. Yeah, it's literally just a spark. Most of them just fade away.
Yep.
Maybe one hits the right, combination of tinder to turn into something.
In my experience, it's been kind of fun because when I think back on my screenwriting times, I would get ideas for like a solution to a plot issue or a character issue, or I would get an idea for an entire, maybe a script. And I would sometimes purposely not write it down. I would purposely not like sort of transfer it from intangible and intangible state to a tangible state by being written down in a document, to see if it kept coming into my mind. I would call it haunting. Like if it haunted me, like that was my process of sort of like vetting whether
if it was a good idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I think ultimately it's probably best to try to write your ideas down as much as possible, because you never know if you return to the legal pad or the moleskin. Is it moleskin or moleskine?
Moleskin. I've always called it moleskin. Sorry if that's not.
Or you're
sponsor us and we'll get the name right. No.
Did you just say sponsor us and we'll get the name right? I'm sorry.
No. I think
very funny.
That's actually funny though that you say that you would always do that, because I had the same idea of like, well, if this is persistent, and I always get all my ideas at 11:30 at night, right, when I'm trying to put the head down on the pillow.
I get them in the shower.
All of the ideas, and my mindset for the longest time was, oh, you got to write this down, and then I'd be like, well, if I remember it in the morning, it's worth remembering.
Yes. Yep.
And I have evolved from that, just like you said, where I try to write down as much as I can. I carry a little notebook with me at all times.
Yep. We don't need to.
You just make little comments, just little 1-word, 2-word things, and it's like the Seinfeld episode where he's like, "What the hell does this mean?"
And when he wrote it down, when he woke up, get a drink,
at like 2 a.m.
Yep.
I've had those before.
Sure, I have too.
But I've also had, we were talking about right before we started recording, we listened to "L.A. Freeway" by Guy Clark. Great song. And
link in the show notes.
And I was telling you the story of how he came to that song.
Right.
And from my understanding, the story goes that he essentially was, after he played a gig and they were driving back to, their apartment in LA. He's asleep in the backseat. He wakes up briefly and he's, irritable. If I can just get off of this LA freeway. And, his writer brain kicks on and goes, oh, that's
something
decent.
Yeah.
And he writes it down on a napkin and then goes back to sleep.
Yep.
And 4 months later, different mind, different headspace, different situation, different set of surrounding influences.
Yep.
He finds that napkin and goes, and he writes an entire song, and it's a wonderful song. It's an amazing song, and it all sparked from. It's a song that is like this great grand. It talks about a lot more than just the literal wanting to get off of a freeway, but in the moment he was just like, "Get me off of this freeway."
Yep.
And I love that. That's a great story because it's kind of like you said, you just got to catch everything.
Yes.
Because when you're sitting there writing, you're in a specific headspace, right? If you're writing, you're in that, maybe you've been thinking through that character's perspective, you're in that headspace. Maybe you're pulling really heavily from one film that you watched or a screenplay that you read recently, and you're going through and you're, all of your inspirations coming from that.
You're channeling. I always called it like a state of channeling.
You get the idea and you're like, this is no good.
Yeah.
And it might be no good, but maybe you're just not in the correct space to absorb that idea. I know this has happened to me, and I assume it's happened to you just as many times, but I'll often read you read a piece of poetry or something, or you hear a song and it means nothing to you. It's just like, oh, that's pretty good. And then it hits you in the right moment, and it's the world.
Everything.
The universe.
Everything. Yep.
Whoa, how did I ever miss this? This is the greatest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. How could somebody have encapsulated something so perfect?
Right.
And so, your headspace, that's kind of why I like this. I like writing down all of my ideas. I experience it with the podcast because we're just kind of talking and we're not really premeditating on a lot of these conversations.
Right.
We premeditate, but we're not necessarily coming in with, we need to hit these talking points. It's very free associative.
Concrete outline, like, hey, let's wrap up that segment on that part of that topic and move into the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, we'll come back and listen to stuff and whoa.
Yeah.
I'm really glad I said that on there.
Yes.
Like that's interesting. Or I'll do this with old writing. I read you that thing the other day that I wrote. In a particular headspace.
Yep.
And I was reading that. I'm like, wow, this is a lot more meaningful to me. I just kind of wrote it at the time, removed from it for like a year and a half. And that's weird.
Yeah. What is that? It's like
you get removed from it and then you come back to it in a different headspace and it takes on a whole new meaning. So anyways, I won't continue to go down that rabbit hole, but
let me ask you this.
I think you're right with the eventual thing of, just write them all down and just try to get as many of them as possible.
Well, let me ask you this too, because this kind of like factors in. Let's not go down into like writer's block and all that stuff, but like this is about inspiration, ideas, having like clear vision for something that you want to work on. What's your relationship to just like, I don't know what the right phrase or term is, ideation or idea generation, coming up with ideas that you then have a sort of a pool of contenders to act upon, whether you write a poem or write a screenplay or go out and take photographs. Like, do you have a good relationship with coming up with ideas, or do you have an antagonistic relationship with that process?
I really enjoy I enjoy the process quite a bit. You have to be working with somebody who's like-minded, I think. Yeah. And so that gets into like choosing your collaborators carefully, because you and I can sit here and ideate. Yeah. And it feels effortless. There's people I work with on a daily basis where I can ideate and it's effortless. Anything's open. Yep. Let's try anything. Wow, that's it. That's the one. And there's an understanding that like my idea is not more correct than your idea, and your idea is not more correct than. Let's just keep throwing stuff out, and again, we'll know it when we see it. Yep. I don't think you can beat a legal pad and a pen and writing the same thing 100 different ways. Yeah. Anything that comes to mind, you take. Here's the thing that a lot of people in 2023 I don't really want to accept. I wrote this down. Usually, the first idea is not the best idea, whatever that means. Usually, the first idea is not the right one. Right. Usually you've got to take, the first idea, you're turning off of the main road, right? Well, you got to turn down, 6 work roads and, you jump a creek, and eventually you'll get somewhere worth being. Right. But it just takes time. Ideation just takes time. And writing just takes time, and everybody wants stuff quick and snappy these days. And you just got to be willing to take time.
And I think although that is, probably more often than not, that first idea or that first version of the idea isn't the, sort of the thing. Like that's not the answer or whatever you want to call it. And I really liked in Rick Rubin's book where he talked about sometimes you do go back to the original thing.
Yeah.
Like you've tried all these different
Sometimes
things.
you nail, but there's no way of knowing.
And this isn't the execution necessarily. It's just fleshing out the idea to figure out how to execute it, right? So maybe you try, like with Rick Rubin, it's music, obviously, you try some effects on the guitar, or, you're trying different things, but then all of a sudden you're like, you know what, the idea that we had the first time, like that was it.
We hit on it.
And I think, again, that goes back to openness, surrender, all of that stuff, that you're not like, well, the first idea is never the right one. It's never like, if you have that kind of binary thinking in that process, I think you're really doing yourself a disservice.
Well, and I just want to put a caveat because you just inspired something like
you got an idea?
You've got to be willing, because sometimes you'll get to an idea and you'll flesh something out and you'll get close, and maybe you've, like, some collaborators have also come on board and agreed.
Right.
And then you figure out, this isn't going to work. We need to go back to the original. We had it right originally. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say this is because we had a project recently, like a bigger project, and a larger team was involved. Yeah. And so me and one of the collaborators I was working with, we went through all of the months of developing concepts and ideas. And we got to one, and everybody kind of got on board with it. And then we start continuing to develop it and work through this design. And then we figured out this isn't it. Yeah. And we had to go back, and you can either do this from a place of embarrassment, like, oh, I got it wrong. I think that's the wrong way to approach it. You have to go back and just be like, look, we continue to work through this, and we thought that we had something here. And if you're being honest, if you're being true to the idea, if it's you're actually going for the best idea and there's no ego involved, then you should be okay with being, and this is what happened, is this isn't it. It doesn't work. Yeah. We got it right the first time. And now some people might look at that as, so you wasted all that time? No. Well, no, because now we know we got it right the first time. Mm-hmm. And that's great. And, is it going to inform the next time? Maybe, but that'll be its own scenario. But on this specific case, we had to talk to everybody, and everybody kind of came on board, and we went back to the original, and it turned out great. Mm-hmm. But you can't have that, oh man, we wasted all this time. And some people, unfortunately, a lot of people, I think, they calculate the time goes into the calculation. Right. Or the effort goes into the calculation. We couldn't have gotten it right the first time because we spent 100 hours in the second version. Well, you can spend 100 hours on something. It's the Bruce Springsteen. Right. He did the demo tapes for Nebraska in a bedroom on a tape recorder.
Link in the show notes.
Great album. So good. Did the demo tapes in a bedroom. And they go to record it in the studio, and he's got the backing band and sing, everybody's got his stereo track, and everybody there's 18 tracks. It's professionally produced, great mics,
multiple vocals, wall of sound.
Absolutely.
All that stuff.
And we got it right the first time. Yep. We're just going to keep the demo.
Yep.
People are like, oh, this is weird. But then, 45 years later, this
and that idea might also hold your thought, but that idea might also get shot down because that's not what normally happens. We can kill ideas because that's not what we've done before. Yeah. There's this status quo that gets you locked in. And again, we got to watch out that we're not, because every idea about surrender and openness, not we haven't done that before. That's okay. This is,
I think every idea is its own organism. Yeah. Or every collection of ideas, every project is its own organism. Right. When we're coming up with, when we're working on a production together, we're not approaching that with the same approach that we had to building this podcast. Right. Because that's a different thing. It's, some of the thinking structures might be similar, but it's a different organism. We're not, we're not we did this, so now it's just, okay. Start from the ground and build your way up. It's zero-based budgeting, but for creative work.
And even the idea with this podcast, you know, there's obviously precedent. There's a lot of podcasts out there, even in the format sort of like ours, where we're tackling like a specific issue or working through something in an episode. We're not sitting there going, I'm not going, well, Alex, we can't really have this more of a free flow episode, because if you look at these other podcasts, like they have like a hard stop at 15 minutes for the first topic, whether they're through with it or not, and then they move on. Like, that's how we have to do it.
Yeah.
And we're like, no, we're going to do it a little differently. And it may not be like the best idea in the first 2, 3, 4, 5 episodes.
Yeah.
But we're going to surrender to that process, be open, and we're going to figure out what the show's form is. But without going, you know, hey, Alex, what if we did an episode like this? Well, hold, we've set this precedent with all of our episodes that we do them like this. We can't, like, I that's kind of interesting, but I'm scared because it feels different. It doesn't feel like the status quo for what we've created here. What's our audience going to, and you start having all these other forces at play, what's expected of us. We just talked about this pre-show. That sort of murders good ideas, or murders experimentation. Because sometimes experimentation, even if you're sharing that work, is part of ideation. It's part of arriving at a better state of whatever it is that you're making, a podcast, a YouTube channel, your photography, whatever. And I think, you know, we can't get too precious about that. And I don't know if you had a thought on that, but
no,
I had another sort of
go for it. I mean, I think you can't get too precious about an idea. Like my thinking goes to the so Matt just purchased Sleeping by the Mississippi, which I'm sure most people,
link in the show notes.
if you're watching the show at all because of photography, you've heard of that book. And you know, there's an interview somewhere. It might be on his channel, but it might be like an older interview from like
Alex Soth, the photographer who Sleeping by the Mississippi.
And forgive me if I'm just misattributing the quote, which I may be, because it's been a little bit. But there's like, he had to kind of move beyond that, going into a situation expecting that he knew what to photograph, and just kind of had to start surrendering to like the scene.
Yep.
That just kept coming into my head. Like, you know, you gotta just kind of surrender to what's presented.
Yes.
Because when you walk in with an expectation, you're
agenda.
either going to try to mold the idea into something that it's not.
Yep.
To serve that.
Yep.
Or you're going to be disappointed because it doesn't meet the expectation. Right. So it's like you're going to lose either way. Yeah. So just like throw it out the window, get rid of the expectation.
Well, and you can, like with my idea about photographing these fireworks tents and doing portraits of the people who are running them. Like, I can develop a very concrete version of that in my mind. Yeah. Like, this is what I think it's going to be. And then that turns into, this is what I want it to be. And this is what it has to be. Right. And then I go to actually do it. And if I'm getting frustrated that it's not matching what I had in my mind,
serving this.
It's not that it's not good, or it's not. You're just brain locked on this thing that isn't the truth of what's before you. So again, you have to go back to surrender, openness, and listening, because what you formulated in your mind based on this idea that was very inspiring, you became emotionally attached to. Maybe you thought if you executed this project a certain way, it would lead to certain results, whether it was on the commercial side or the, like your work being revered or getting into a gallery or whatever. So you really have to be careful with all that.
Yeah.
The sort of next prompt. So I'm going to wrap up that by saying, my relationship to ideas is very good.
Yeah.
I have no problem like writing down ideas, coming up with ideas. I feel like you referenced earlier that they were earlier you thought that they were finite. I'm like, keep them coming.
Yeah,
like I've got
out.
notepads, notes, documents on my phone. So all that is good. I'll be curious to hear about for you how this goes, but for me, my antagonist in the journey from, I guess, idea to finished
to finalize. Yeah.
For me, it's execution.
Well, so before we get into execution, I have a question. What is your relationship with creative collaborations and ideas in terms of has your experience been? Okay. Like in terms of, you're collaborating with somebody.
Yeah.
Obviously, I want to hear about like the negative experience. Like the positive experience is the positive experience. Everything just kind of flows. Any ideas is viewed as, a possibility.
Yeah, I think
everything's open. Have you had negative experiences?
I have. Yeah, I've had experiences. The first ones that I think of, and I, certainly won't say the individuals with whom I was working, but
we're talking about you, Will. I'm just kidding. I don't actually know anybody.
Working on some screenplays with directors that my manager had connected us with, and we had a spec screenplay, and we wanted to bring in a director so we could start to package things up, and that director has notes, or they want to do a page run rewrite or whatever, and you can just tell that ultimately they are serving their own self-interest, and they are going to use you as a writer who's working for free. They don't have any skin in the game. They don't have to pay you. There's no sort of downside for them to have you do their bidding, and you end up being sort of a tool that they have to try to help them achieve what they want for themselves in their career. And a lot of times that, to me, in those experiences, felt like it was very much based on coming from a place of ego. On the flip side, whether it was in filmmaking, sometimes YouTube videos I've made with you guys, or stuff that we've talked about, making this podcast, where you have collaborations with people where everyone is surrendered to making the thing the best it can be, and the ego is not present in that collaboration. And everybody is taking their experience, their taste, their eye for the truth, their eye for what feels right, and they are focusing that on the collaboration. And when ideas come up, it's, well, Cody had 2 good ideas in a row, and now it's my turn.
Yeah.
It's not,
yeah.
Well, I think, you guys don't really have a good idea of what this thing needs to be, so I'm going to kind of take over so that you don't steer it in the wrong direction. I'm going to really push my agenda by shooting down all of your ideas and not being open to actually listening to them, because I've already sort of dismissed you as a collaborator, but I'm going to keep up appearances.
Absolutely.
That whatever, just because I like working with this person on the team. None of that stuff, where everybody is just, again, open and surrendered. They listen to the idea. They, they put it up against the other ideas that are in play, their own idea that's in play. And maybe they can't go, well, no, let's go with this route. They go, that's not quite it. But that got me thinking, like, what about this? Or what if we did this? And you're all just working together to arrive at the best idea.
I think what you hit on right there is, what if we did this? What if we do this?
Yeah.
That's when it's at its best, right?
100%.
Like, I say something, you build off of that, I build off of that.
Ooh, that's cool. What if?
Yeah, what if? Okay.
And then you're inspiring each other. And
you can get in there, and you have to also be like, with the other person and with yourself, you have to be like, no, actually that was bad. I can like, that wasn't good. We don't need to do that. Let's not go in that direction.
Right.
And I think, I think that, like, again, it kind of goes back to drop the ego.
Yeah.
Get out of the ego. And that's the response. That's the irony of it too, because a lot of your managers and directors and things like that have huge egos.
Yeah.
But when you're in that position, your job is kind of just to be open.
Yeah.
That's kind of the job. Just like you guide the conversation, and the ideas are going to come. You can give your ideas. Maybe you can provide that context that we talked about earlier.
Right.
But it's not, some people are out here and they're like managing groups of people, and they think they're managing because they have to always be right.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not the job description.
I think too, sometimes, there's levels of collaborators, or sort of collaborators that are not really participating in the true spirit of collaboration. You do have people that are just, they're locked into their ego, what's best for them, what they want, etc. Sometimes you have people that don't have ego, but there's some agenda, like something has sort of taken them over, whether it's like too much focus on the commercial result that it's going to get, even though it's a good idea, like, oh, that's not commercially viable. And even though my ego isn't driving that decision, it's this external force that you're answering to, like, oh, well, that might not test well, or whatever it is.
Yeah. I think that's
or if we use that camera, like the printing costs are really high. Yeah, it looks the best, but and so you have to sort of be like, is there an agenda that's at play in here that's influencing your openness and surrender and ability to surrender to the best idea? Because we can have that conversation after we acknowledge it's the best idea. Like, what's this idea going to cost us?
Yeah.
And can we afford it? And I don't mean money. I mean, it could be anything: time, money, tools, like acquiring the tools needed to execute that idea, whatever it is. And so you have to watch out for those folks too.
Yeah.
Because, and again, not to go down the commerce and art rabbit hole, but sometimes that's a factor. You're working with a producer, a studio, you're working with an editor on assignment for a magazine, whatever it is, where there's these other forces at play that sometimes you ultimately have to answer to.
Yeah.
But in the ideation process, maybe we can set that aside.
That's it. Yeah.
Arrive at the idea,
the distinction,
and then come up with a solution.
Because it is expectations, just another form, right?
Yeah.
But that's the distinction,
right?
Is yes, these are all masters that you have to answer to at some point. Mm-hmm. But when you're in that base phase of just capturing ideas, you have to be open. And I think a lot of people miss this. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people are more inclined to just, let's set the parameters, then we'll ideate, then we'll do the thing. Yeah. You have to be unchained. You can't box yourself in at the start. Anything's possible, because getting into that, ideas are just problem solving.
Yeah.
You have the idea, you can problem solve. There's been some of the most, and I'm thinking of filmmaking, obviously, because it's so cost centric. You have the producer to answer to, you have the set design, the location, you have all of that, or, cost of actors. But a lot of the best, innovations in any form have come from this great idea.
Yeah.
That was unrestricted. Mm-hmm. Then you add in the restrictions. Yeah. And then you figure out, okay, how can we keep this idea and make it work with these restrictions? And then suddenly you have an innovation that was could never have been conceived prior to that. Yep. And if you would have gone in and said, no, can't do that.
Yeah.
Too much restriction, then you're never going to get that innovation.
Absolutely.
You're just going to get more of the same. So that was, I'm super glad you hit on that, because I thought about that earlier, and then we just kind of didn't. But starting without expectation, but also don't box yourself in. Let's get into some like tangible specifics. Idea capture. How do you do it? Are you a notes guy? Are you a iPhone notes? Do you maybe we avoid naming like specific software too much.
Sure.
I mean, we've mentioned like Milanote, but capture. How do you capture? Like I said, I love legal pads.
Yeah.
And I have little notebooks and a space pen that I carry with me at all times. Mm-hmm. And it's in my pocket. Sometimes I'll go a week without using it. I have one in my nightstand.
Yep.
I've got, paper all over the place. I'm a paper guy.
I go back and forth.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, what's the thing I can grab right now, or maybe there's a little bit of like, what is this idea associated with? So if an idea is associated with my YouTube channel, I tend to go digital with that.
Interesting.
I know, because I think with the YouTube stuff, it's weird, because like I get really inspired with creating my content around, an educational video, a tutorial, right? And it's not a lot of artistic creativity, that sort of aspect to it, even though, sometimes I'm goofy, or I, kind of mess around with the form a little bit, but it's, fairly straightforward technical information.
That's fascinating though, that the capture, the medium of expression influences the capture medium.
Yeah, for me, it could be, and I think because this goes to execution, and I know we touched on that a bit ago, and are going in this path. But for me, I think with the YouTube channel, it's a greater reality that it will turn into a video, because it's essentially my full-time job.
Yeah.
And it has commercial results that are connected, which is a whole other conversation where so much of my decision making on the artistic creative side has been influenced by the commercial viability of something.
Right.
And that we'll save that for another conversation. But then when it comes to the things that are more, this has no connection to like making money or earning ad revenue or getting a sponsor, and it's just like my sort of the creative self-expression that I'm interested in, the fireworks project, screenplay ideas that are, now that I'm not like pursuing screenwriting commercially, like to like earn a living, I get ideas for stuff, little funny bits. Like I still take notes on little stand-up comedy bits that I think would be funny, because in a past life or earlier in my life, I really went hard on stand-up comedy and improv comedy and all that. So that stuff I tend to write on scratch paper, moleskins, legal pads, whatever I can get. And I do have digital, like a notes document for like movie title ideas that might then like spawn a movie idea, and then, movie ideas. So it'll be interesting, just to wrap up with photography. It'll be interesting with photography. Like, how do I figure out how to document the ideas there? Because like with the fireworks tent idea, and I talked to you just about like going out to the racetrack in this small town in Iowa, dirt track racing, and just doing a documentation of that.
It's funny about photography. Just
like, I don't need to write it. Like, I don't need to write it down.
Act
like
is the capture of the idea, right? The act of like to document the idea of taking photos of a fireworks tent. You just point.
Because for me, it's
the
like,
notation is the photography.
Well, and the idea is, this is a thing I'm curious about. This is the place where I would go to do it, and I'm not going to sit there like get photos of
fireworks.
Like people in the stands,
things that
like,
you could photograph.
That's the beauty of photography to me, at least the photography I like to do. I get an idea about a setting and a lifestyle, a world. And I go, I'm just going to go to that world and take photographs of the stuff that I
will say, though, we talked about, because you just mentioned the racetrack project.
Yeah.
And for, I guess, full context, before Matt was talking about how he wanted to go and photograph an Iowa racetrack on Saturday night. Yeah. And there's a Bruce Springsteen song.
Yeah.
Racing in the Streets.
Yeah. So good.
And basically the thought that I was having, right? The idea I was having.
Full circle.
When you're, I don't necessarily, like you said, write down like, I need this shot and this shot.
Right.
But I will have mood boards or bulletin boards of material.
Yeah.
Where, I'm not writing down shoot racetrack, but I am grabbing that song because it inspired that, and I'm putting that on a board, and I'm saying, and this is not like photography project mood board. It's just, general capture. Sometimes like I'll do monthly playlists in my phone.
Yeah.
I used to put them out, and sometimes I still do, and some, whatever. But I have this playlist. And, sometimes the best way to notate an idea is to take the song and just add it to a playlist.
Yeah.
And then you can come back to that. Or you see a movie, I'll do this a lot where I'll like take a picture of this, like I'll pause it, take a picture of the screen.
Yeah.
Or I'll write a note, like at 42,
I take lots of pictures, actually.
16,
Yep.
this movie. And then I'll just write a little 2-word blurb. I'll do the Seinfeld thing. And most of the time I don't even revisit it. But sometimes I do, and then it turns into something. So I think capturing things on a bulletin board can be an effective way, even if you're not necessarily writing out like shoot the people at the tent and things like that. But sometimes I do, like you said, the stand-up bits or whatever. Sometimes I'll see a situation and it's just humorous, or there's something else there, and I'll just notate the thought or whatever. I mean, what do the structure of your notations look like? Is it just like, I don't know, make an observation on like the chair,
Yeah.
How would that look like? I know this is a little granular, but
I think I just will write. It's almost like a free association. That idea happens, and I just kind of jot down words. Maybe in phrases, sometimes in sentence structure, not really just like just like a listing of words. Oh, we're at 45 minutes.
All right. Can you do like a 10-minute
I gotta leave in 7 minutes.
Oh shoot. Okay, we got 5 minutes left. So free association sentences. Since you got to leave in 7 minutes, we've got to wrap up quickly. I want you to talk about capture versus execution.
Well, here's an idea I have. I wonder if we save execution as another episode.
As a different episode. That's a good idea.
So I think
this is a good idea.
I think because I got just flashed into my head a minute ago, and I'm like, we could probably kill an hour just on, especially if these episodes were possibly back to back. That we know this is the episode on ideas. The next episode is on we have ideas.
Now we're executing the idea,
and what's our relationship to execution?
Yeah, I like that because it kind of does.
Yeah.
Getting into the relationship with execution, it is a rocky one.
It's a rocky one for me too, brother. But it's weird, and just like a kind of like a teaser, I guess, of what maybe the next episode could be. But for me, it's like in some areas, execution is no problem.
Yeah,
execute all day long in consistency, and this echoes back to: does this have a commercial result? Versus the ones that don't, are like, okay, well, that's not commercially viable, so it's just going to sit there until I have enough money where I can stop doing the stuff that has commercial results and then just focus on the artistic stuff, which to me is just bullshit.
You said just sit there. So let's wrap with this then.
That's my whole life.
Just sit there.
Just sit there.
How are you filing your ideas? Are you storing them? Are they just sitting in I used to write stuff on my phone and it would just get lost, and like 2 years later I go back. I find it easier to interface with a notebook because usually what will happen is I'll get sick of the notebook just sitting there, and so I'll go and I'll distill what I still think is good, a month later into a smaller, more compact thing, and then I'll move on. At the end of the year, I typically sit down, and if anything is worth keeping, I'll write it down on a separate thing. Right. Like that's my writing process. I'll write. Yeah. I'll just do scenes and scenes and scenes, and then I'll go back a couple of weeks later, and anything that I think is still good, I'll move it over, and it cuts it down, and that'll continue to develop. The rest gets burned. Right. Unless there's some kind of like, oh, this was interesting, it just wasn't quite right. Mm-hmm. You can like note that down, but. What's your filing system for ideas? How do you? Right now, everything is, I would say it's probably scattered across legal pads. I keep legal pads in my truck. I have legal pads in my studio. I have obviously digital documents of different things. And I think, again, and we can unpack this in another conversation, all of that stuff, most of those, other than the sort of YouTube centered stuff that is in like a specific piece of software, and it's like the title is there and ideas about what I'm going to do are there. These are all scattered because I don't think I ever really believed that I could execute on them because there's not a viable commercial result from it. I think so. It's your relationship has probably changed recently. Yes, and I'm in a state of upheaval and flux right now where I'm starting to say, fuck that. That's bullshit. Everything's open. And how can I? And this is, I think, what you're getting at. Knowing that all these disparate elements and ideas and things are scattered all over the place, how do you start saying, well, no, I am going to start executing on these? Yeah. And how do you collect all that material and start looking through what are the things that bubble up? And I will be very analytical about my approach, because this is again part of the problem with cultural forces and this and that, commercial viability, all that bullshit. I'll start going, what's the best idea that's I don't want to say easiest to execute, but maybe as like a smaller form. So I can start like stacking those wins, the string of pearls, if you will, to start moving up to some of the stuff that's a much bigger undertaking, like Ted Snow. If I do a fireworks tent project, that's somewhere kind of on that first quarter to the middle area of like the complexity scale, versus let's say executing ideas. I'm inspired by my anxiety and frustration with the home and disorganization, and I'm going to execute on taking all these photos across a year. And then that'll sort of be an idea that sits and doesn't realize its final form, whether it's going to be a zine, a book, a gallery, whatever. But that didn't take a lot of time and effort and take me away from the things that earn me a living to partially execute that idea. So I think just finding that it's like working on muscle, right? You don't start out bench pressing 250 pounds. You start out bench pressing the bar and work your way up.
Well, in the killer thing is just as we wrap up is me vetting all of my ideas through commercial viability has actually kept me, I think, from getting to a place where maybe executing some of these ideas from a place of self-expression and just really wanting to make this thing and then sharing the work, but without some commercial results as part of it, could have been something that got a commercial result and helped me get to the point where I fantasize about, where I can kind of set aside all the stuff that I think about in regards to commercial viability and really just make work.
Yeah. I mean, my intuition is that that's going to turn out to be true. That, the most commercial success is going to come from this, wherever you end up with this idea of dropping your commercialized framework.
Yep.
I think that's suddenly where you're going to start to see. Because, I mean, then your definition of success changes a little bit too. Like, yes, you have the one-to-one money, but like just waking up fired up to create stuff is its own amazing reward.
In executing something that I'm not sitting there thinking about some commercial result.
Yeah. It's just executing for the sake of.
And everything that you've shared with me, from this documentary on the century of self to my experience in Los Angeles, all of this stuff is kind of referencing that storm I was talking about, I think is moving towards a kind of a dismantling of what I was conditioned to think about my creative impulses.
Yeah.
It was to always pass it through this commercial viability filter and make judgment calls about what to pursue and what not to pursue based on its commercial viability. Right. Can this earn me a living? Can this make me a good provider? Can this get me the freedom that I think I can have once I reach some certain number in a bank account? Is there like a delivery or something?
Yeah, there must be something.
That's to just, from ideas to me dismantling all the bullshit that has affected me in my life and made me take a creative core and constantly put it through this commercial viability bullshit.
Yeah.
I think at 44 years old, these forces between what you've shared with me, our conversations, these other experiences, has started to break me out of that default mode of thinking that was such a default that I wasn't even aware that that's what I was doing.
Yeah. You're like caught in it and you didn't even, you don't see the, yeah. What is water?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like, to put it in commercial terms, like I got pulled out of the Matrix.
Well, we're getting pulled out of the Matrix by my doorbell right now.
And
so
it's 4:31. I have to pick up my daughter at preschool. Speaking of,
well, good episode.
Speaking of commercial reliability, I have to pay for preschool.
See you guys later.